Well, hello, the internet, and welcome to another edition of the Breakfast Club with Got That Funk. Thank you for joining me. This is going to be a long video for me on the Breakfast Club. I normally don't like to make videos too long, but this is going to be sort of two videos in one. It's great to have Agent of Doubt back on the Breakfast Club as a guest host, and he's standing in for Nathan for at least the month of October, and maybe a little while into November, I'm not sure. But he made a video last week, which I really meant to respond to on Saturday, but I ended up going out and having fun instead. Sue me. So I'm going to do that response in the beginning of this video, and then I also wanted to respond briefly to his response to me for my video last week regarding Christine Blasey Ford and Brett Kavanaugh. Even though, as I make this video, the vote to confirm him is pretty much a guaranteed thing happening tomorrow morning or afternoon. So anyway, but I'll get to that later. First of all, Michael's first video last week was called Untenable Housing Prices. And considering this is an issue that so many people have in common in terms of personal experience, I'm kind of surprised I don't really hear it getting talked about very often on YouTube, if ever. And maybe I just don't move in the right circles to hear that kind of thing on YouTube. That's just as likely as anything, I suppose. Or maybe people just don't talk about it. And if that's the case, I'm kind of glad we're talking about it now. When I first moved to the UK, it was 1989, end of. And so for the 1990s, I was pretty green in this country. And my wife, who I moved over here with, when we got married, she was still 22, right? And she had already bought and sold a house, which to me at 27 just seemed remarkable. What do you mean they gave you a mortgage when you were 18? What? I couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe it, And the housing market in the UK was on a pretty steady upward gradient for the beginning part of the 90s. But the problem was that there was this big habit of buying homes, fixing them up, living in them for a few years, getting some equity and hoping that the upward trend would be good enough with your equity to then sell that house and get a nicer house, kind of like you might do with cars or something. I don't know. You buy it, you fix it up, you sell it for a bit more, that kind of thing, and then you get another one that's better and you do the same thing to that one. And 4 or 5 houses down the line, you might find some place where you want to set your roots down because you finally feel like you've made it or you've maxed out your capacity compared to your earnings. And that's where I really wanted to go with my part of this part of the video response, because like Michael in his second video on the Breakfast Club this week, I've got a guest slot as well within this video, which I'll get to in a minute. But the housing prices can't exceed the local earning power without causing serious problems and risk of collapse in the market. Because like in the 90s, what happened was the property prices were going up so fast and virtually everywhere. And then what happened was all of a sudden the bubble popped, as it were, because what happened was used to be, when I first moved here, you could only get a mortgage for like 3 times whatever your annual salary was. In the 25, 30 years since I've been in this country, now it's like 5 times your annual salary. And instead of having to put down 10%, you only have to put down 5%. And then the government will give you a supplementary loan for another percent or whatever, if the housing scheme is blah, blah, whatever. Anyway, it doesn't work the same way as it used to. It used to be 3 times your annual salary. Now it's 5 times your annual salary, right? So you're automatically taking a much bigger risk and necessarily taking a bigger chunk out of your take-home pay to pay your mortgage. And there is always going to be a situation where if housing prices keep going up and you start off at the level where you're just about able to afford your mortgage, with inflation generally, your wages are already getting worth less and less anyway. Plus, if the housing market doesn't do what you need it to do, you're kind of stuck. And what happened in the 90s was housing prices went up so much that when the market collapsed, and it did collapse, the people's houses values went down by so much that the mortgage they had taken out when they bought their house was greater than the value they could sell their house for. So their mortgage was actually more expensive than their house, basically. And of course, they're paying interest on that as well. So there was this massive sort of rush to sell, which of course made, put too much product into the market, as it were, and then prices just kept going down. And that's when we bought our house. We bought our house in Cornwall in 1999, my second wife and I. That was before we were married. And we managed to buy that house when the market had literally hit rock bottom and was about to start bouncing back. We couldn't have timed it better. Nothing to do with on purpose. We just happened to be in the right place at the right time, and we got a great house. I kind of miss that place, actually. Anyway, so I want to include a little video insert here. It's not actually little, it's a few minutes long. And it's about, I don't know, 9 or maybe 8 years old. It's from a friend of mine who used to be a YouTube atheist community guy like me and Agent of Doubt and lots of other people. His name was TOS100. That was his channel's name. His real name's Dan. And he doesn't have that channel anymore, hasn't had it for some years now, quite a few years. But he was a pretty intelligent guy, very interesting to talk to for sure, and got lots of really good stories. And this story directly relates to something Michael was saying in his video last week, although not necessarily about housing prices, but about the problems with the way the economy works and how earning power isn't really enough to really get you into the housing market with any kind of security. And I want you to listen to what TOS100 has to say, and definitely let me know what you think about this guest slot.
I was watching The Amazing Atheist the other day, and he was talking about these people who get mad. They're like, oh, you want a handout? Look at you, lazy bum. I work 2 jobs to get what I've got. I bust my ass to get what little bit I get. And yeah, they sound like idiots. You are overworked and underpaid. You are being exploited. And I think it's sad that people have this mentality. This is no accident. This is a century of work in the making. This was the dream come true for Edward Bernays. If you've never seen the documentary called The Century of the Self, I highly recommend it. It will help you understand what is going on in this country right now. But yeah, these people sound like idiots. Oh yeah, I bust my ass. I work 2 jobs to get to eat 1 meal a day. And this made me think of something that I had experienced when I was a little child. And I want to share it with you because a lot of you may be too young to have been around during these times. But when I was a little kid growing up in the Midwest, we had these little metal boxes on our front stoop. It was for milk. It was the milk box. And what you do is you want to get some milk. Okay, you write down your little order, what you want to get. You want to get a quart of milk, and you want to get a quart of chocolate milk, and whatever else. And you put the money in there and leave it. And then the milkman drives up, and he takes your note and takes your money, and okay, and he puts whatever you want in that box. So when you come out the next morning, poof, there's all your stuff. There's your milk right there. Bet a lot of you have never seen this, but I got to see this. And the point of this is to tell you about my milkman. What does my milkman have to do with people who are busting their asses at 2 jobs to get what little they have? My milkman was borderline retarded. Not only that, he was a functional illiterate. He could read just well enough to get your order right. And he could add and subtract just well enough to get your change right most of the time. He had this job from the time he got the job until the time he died. There was no scrambling and looking for a job for him. He found a job, he got it, and it was always there for him because employers back then were all about it. Hey, this guy's dedicated and he works hard. Let's keep him around. There was no talk of, well, maybe we can get rid of him and get someone who's less experienced and we can pay them less. There was no talk of that. But I want to tell you something else about my milkman. He owned his house outright. No mortgage. He owned the house that he bought with the money he made as a milkman. You can't do that anymore. If there were such a thing as a milkman today, he'd have to work his job as a milkman and then work somewhere else and then maybe have a third job, and then he'd have to share tight living quarters with another family or two. But no, back then, this is the 60s, the milkman owned his house outright. Also, he owned his car. He didn't get a loan, he paid cash for his car. So now we have a milkman, borderline retarded, functional illiterate, who owns his house and he owns his car. But wait, there's more! Yeah, this gets better. He was married, his wife did not work a job, she stayed home and raised their 9 children. Put most of them into college. A milkman owns his house, owns his car. He's got a wife who stays home to raise the kids, and they all go to college on a milkman's salary. Do you see how far down we have slid? Do you see how bad things have gotten? I have friends who are making 6 figures. None of them are doing as well as the retarded, functional, illiterate milkman. These are people with college degrees. These are people who are very well trained in what they do. These are people who are experts. These are people who hold nice titles. Not doing as good as the retarded milkman. It really blows my mind. TOS 100, thanks for watching.
Well, like I say, there's an awful lot to chew on there, and we could talk about that video all by itself as its own topic, I suppose. But getting back to Michael's video about housing prices and so forth, at the end of his video, he mentioned about how you know, people who are ex-cons have a hard time, you know, resettling, getting good work, getting good housing, that kind of thing. And just as an aside, you know, I work in construction for the past sort of 4 or 5 years. At the moment, I'm a scaffolder. And I think it was 2015, every single person I worked with on my crew, except for me, had been in prison. I was literally the only one. I worked with like 10 guys for like a whole summer, and they had all been in jail for one reason or another. And construction, at least in this country, is one of those areas where people who either don't have much education or don't have a lot of formal training other than a trade, you know, can get work. And that also includes people who've been in and out of prison a few times. I was kind of surprised by that, but I'm actually glad, of course, that people can get a job when they get out of prison, because it makes it much less likely they'll reoffend. Anyway, so there's that. I wanted to also do a video response to Michael's response to me about why he remains skeptical about Dr. Blasey-Ford and about Judge Kavanaugh. And I want to stress, first of all, Michael, when I use the hashtag #IBelieve, I'm not part of or really aligned with any movement, like a hashtag movement or anything like that. I'll be blunt. I put the hashtag in the title because I knew it would go on Twitter, and therefore it would go into the hashtag and maybe get some more views. It's marketing. You know, that's just true. Anyway, but I do, like yourself, you know, I tend to believe people's stories when they tell me about their personal life experiences if I know the person, or if I have good reason to think that they have no reason to be making it up. Other than that, people like in the media or people that I don't know very well, I remain, open-minded, and I try to reserve judgment. I don't believe or disbelieve. I take it seriously, and I try to see, if it seems credible or not. And there's loads of different signifiers for that. And when it comes to, so when I said I believe in the hashtag, it's not that I just, my default position isn't necessarily to believe all survivors. My default position is to think, okay, there's probably no smoke without fire, but at the same time, there is such a thing as a false accusation. And we need to be clear about a few things. You can't have a situation where you believe every single accusation as conclusive without any kind of due process or proof, because basically that gives anybody power to fuck you up with an accusation. That's like the Salem witch trials, basically. On the other hand, you can't have a situation where you never believe someone's claims unless there's some kind of physical proof or evidence, because if that were the case, as long as you don't, bruise or bite someone and you're alone with them, you can do anything you want and get away with it. And that can't be okay. So, there's got to be some kind of a balance and a way of approaching these types of arguments. And for me, when I watched the testimony from Christine Blasey-Ford, I thought she just seemed incredibly genuine. She seemed, Meryl Streep couldn't have acted it that well, I don't think, if she was an actress. If this was some kind of a performance, I think it was world class if it was a performance, and I don't think it was a performance. I think it was pretty genuine. It was striking to me how genuine it felt. So there's that, but more to the point, it was the fact that Kavanaugh kept telling blatant falsehoods, lies, if you will, during his testimony. Simple things which people don't seem to think should matter. And I'm sorry, as far as I'm concerned, if you're testifying to the Senate under oath, there should be no fibs or white lies of any kind. You should be as forthright and honest as is humanly possible. And you shouldn't be just telling lies for the sake of trying to make yourself not look bad. For example, Brett Kavanaugh said many times in his testimony that he's never drank to the point where he can't remember what happened. I'm not even much of a drinker myself, but there's at least 3 or 4 occasions that I don't have any idea how I got home. One time I thought I had my car stolen, and it turned out it was in my own driveway. So I must have driven it home the night before, but I have no recollection of that. It's one of the most shameful things I've ever done as well, because I've only driven drunk 3 times in my life, and that time I don't even remember it. So, but I don't get drunk hardly ever. I think I haven't been drunk in public for almost 10 years, but I have those moments. So I understand and recognize and openly admit that incredulity is not an argument, okay? But it's not just that one statement. There were so many statements that Kavanaugh said, which are blatantly trying to make him sort of paint himself as, basically whiter than white, if you'll pardon the expression. And no, there's so many things that he said. So many things he said. The Devil's Triangle being a drinking game, bullshit. That's complete bullshit. The whole boofing thing, that's bullshit. Now everyone says, oh, these things don't matter. They do matter. You don't have... all he had to do was say, yeah, I was a bit of a dick when I was a teenager. But I suppose, from his point of view, damned if you do, damned if you don't, so you might as well don't, Nevertheless, if you're going to lie to Congress under oath, you should be automatically disqualified from being on the Supreme Court. That, to me, the fact that he was lying so much also, to me, added credibility to what Dr. Blasey-Ford was saying, because nothing that Kavanaugh said contradicted her testimony, even though he painted it as such. Like when he said, for example, that, all the witnesses that she named refuted it. Even her friend Leland apparently refuted it. None of them refuted it. all of them, without exception, said they couldn't recall it. That's not the same thing as saying it didn't happen. Not by a mile. And that kind of distortion or contortion of the truth, if that's not a lie, it's intent to deceive at best. And again, to me, you know, why does an innocent person feel the need to deceive? So there's that. Nothing is black and white, and I'm sure there's an awful lot more to this whole situation than any of us in the public realm really have a clue about. Nevertheless, I think it's a travesty the way the whole situation was handled with the FBI investigation being so limited they couldn't talk to any witnesses who could corroborate the story in the first place. They weren't looking for corroboration of her story. They were looking for exoneration from him. That's what they were looking for, and that's what they delivered, and the whole thing's a fucking travesty. And as far as I'm concerned, anyone who supports this shit just isn't living in the same fucking reality that I am, and I don't know how to reconcile myself with that. It doesn't feel good, and I don't like the fact that, you know, I used to be a pretty chill person. Most of you have known me for a long time on this channel, and, you know, I have like at least 3 or 4 nights a week when I can't sleep more than 3 or 4 hours because I'm up all night thinking about stupid shit about, you know, the ways the world is going at the moment. I don't like it. Anyway, so there's my response to both your videos, Michael. I hope you got something out of it, and I would very much welcome a vigorous discussion about anything that I've spoken about or anything that Dan TOS100 mentioned in his little guest appearance there in my video. And I look forward to seeing you all again next week. Until next time, peace.